Well, welcome back to another episode of Profitless on Purpose, the nonprofit accounting podcast from an accountant's perspective. And I'm one of your hosts, AJ Wheeler, but not just one accountant, two other accountants with me, Mark Palardy.
Hey, everyone.
And Tammy Hess.
Hello.
Great show for you this week, as always. We got three articles to go over. So the first one is actually, is it time for nonprofits to focus on their finances? The short answer is yes. It's always time for them to focus on their finances, but we'll find out why in our first article. And then we have another one regarding Brother, Can You Spare an ROI? How the nonprofit kind of sphere has maybe focused too much on return on investment or professional kind of degrees and advanced education and has lost its way on its missions. I don't know. We have opinions about this, but stick around to find out what they are. And then what's the value of macro trend research? Should your development department focus on the yearly giving report and really hone in on the macro trends in philanthropy? Well, we have some, spoiler alert, we have some opinions on that too. So stick around for that. And then this week's discussion topic is the do's and don'ts of a finance department. And we'll go deep on this one. And we have some thoughts on what you should and shouldn't do in your finance department. Anyway, Tammy, do you want to kick us off with our first article?
So I have one from Accounting Today titled, "It's Time for Nonprofits to Focus on Their Finance." This article was written back in December 2020, when many nonprofits were still navigating through COVID restrictions, lower volunteer support, decreased donations, and increased demands on their services. The article states that nearly 1/3 of nonprofits were expected to close during 2021. This is a dismal view, but the author of this article has hope, as there is a renewed awareness on the importance of clean financial records. The article states that having a clean set of records not only allows for increased organization, but it may fix other areas that have suffered because of disorganized accounting. A messy set of books can make it difficult for the board to understand the financial health of the organization, and it also can discourage donors from giving money to an organization. It may even deter potential employees from joining that particular organization. The article also states that an organization needs a bookkeeper, a controller, and a CFO. While most organizations may not be able to fund all three, the author strongly suggests trying to find ways to support these functions to help the organization not only cover the daily accounting needs, but to analyze and plan for the future. They can do this by creating the right team internally or by using an outside accounting firm to help fill the gaps. You may have already guessed what profession the author works in. Hint, they may be able to fill the gaps that were just mentioned. But while I do agree that having a clear understanding of the financials, analyzing results, building forecasts, and developing strategies are important to any organization, I do realize that this can be a challenge for most small organizations. I was just having a conversation yesterday on how many companies and organizations tend to fall behind in staffing the accounting or finance department. Typically, that's because they aren't seen as revenue generators or donation generators. But in times of extreme growth or severe declines, the work that the accounting or finance department that they produce can be really beneficial to the organization. The question I have to the group is, how does an organization support and or prioritize the accounting/finance department?
Wow, it's like really good question, and I think really good insight, because I think referencing the discussion you had yesterday regarding like a nonprofit not valuing the accounting department as essentially like a revenue maker, and I think you can make the same analogy for like a for-profit business. Often accounting is seen as like number crunchers, bean counters, whatever you want to call them, right? Nerds in the back that just accumulate all the financial data. But especially in a nonprofit, what I think they fail to realize is the extra reporting and controls that need to be in place around that accounting department. And in fact, that dovetails nicely into our discussion topic for today. But I think putting that aside, I think the author, I'm glad the author kind of called it out that you need these three tiers of essentially in the finance department. And you could actually, in a very small nonprofit, you could have like the controller and the staff accountant kind of rolled up into one person, but then you need a person above that to look at the bigger picture, I think. And so, I think trying to navigate that in a small nonprofit, like, and the author's probably right, like talking about funding for a CFO, and I know her slant on it. And I mean, we offer the same kind of services through TCA, but I think realistically looking at it, I think somebody that's trying to staff an accounting department or get an idea of what they would needs to bifurcate what's going on in the accounting department itself, and realize the amount of time that needs to be spent on higher level reconciliation, of reporting and control environment. And there's all these moving pieces to the accounting department that possibly you wouldn't think about if you weren't in like a for-profit business, because many nonprofits are audited, or at the very least they have to submit, like pretty decent financials to be able to have a 990 prepared. But also grantors or even donors are going to be asked for some kind of like report on what what their money has been doing. So the tracking and the getting the information into the accounting system in a timely, organized manner to be able to produce those reports, even for a small organization, is vital. So I think your first step in understanding it and understanding the finances is, figuring out how much time each one of those things takes. And then I think you can make an informed decision on whether or not that's somebody that you hire in-house, or if it's more cost beneficial to you to hire an outside one. And I think your ROI, or like the way you look at, like that, is you're going to lose out on donations and you're going to lose out on funding if you're not able to accurately report what's done with the money. So I think, like the accounting department, less to look like nerds in the back that are bean counters, need to be front facing and really thought of as like controlling the financial information for that organization that's vital to either give to donors, give to grantors, or give to like the organizing or the organization's board to be able to report the results of the operations on a timely basis. So if there is a problem, people can see it instead of it, kind of festering under the surface for a long time. And then, it could be detrimental to the organization. So, but that's just my thoughts. What do you think, Mark?
So I'm going to be a little contrarian here. I mean, I like the idea of the article and I like everything that you guys have proposed here. But I'm also kind of thinking to myself as I read this, is this an echo chamber, right? So here's an accountant who's asking three accountants. Well, she's not asking us to, but three accountants are commenting on an article about whether accounting is good. Yes, is the answer. Huzzah. So we have a solution. All accountants say accounting is good. So, I think there is definitely merit in having these three roles in an organization. And one of the things that I pulled out of this article that I liked her quote was, success in a nonprofit, how is it different from an ordinary corporation? Well, success is measured by how funds are spent, right? So if you're a small nonprofit and you're trying to figure out, am I going to spend money on an accountant, or am I going to get more money in programs? Well, certainly it depends on how small you are and what funds you're going for, right? Some people might just start a nonprofit part-time, volunteer. They're not looking to make it a huge business. They might not be going after grant funding. They might just have a specific cause that they are geared and aimed toward. And in that case, you might do okay just having somebody who is capable at keeping books, and you might not have a lot of compliance things. There are a lot of nonprofits that fall under that $50,000 threshold where they just file a 990N postcard. So while I see the merit as definitely as you grow, that you need to grow these roles and consider their importance, I think to say that all nonprofits need this triumvirate maybe misses the point, in that success is measured by how the funds are spent.
Yeah, those are all good points. And I think that you're right in terms of the size of an organization kind of does lead to the size of the finance and accounting team to be able to support it. I do think that, and obviously this article is focused on the decline of nonprofits and why it's even more important to get those financial records in order. But I guess when I was reading it, I was really focused on it at any point in time in an organization's life cycle, that they should really kind of be focused on, and how they do that and how they support that is really dependent on where they're going. But I do think that there are times where a nonprofit is getting a lot of new grants or a lot of new revenue streams, and they haven't properly accounted for it, and that can become a problem. So it's in that weird timing of trying to figure out when you need that support is kind of the biggest question. And also with this, the making the model of what you may have with the board, they may be able to provide some of that financial resource or accounting kind of insight that would help that out. But it is something to at least consider and talk about as an organization is getting implemented as they're growing or as they're declining, to kind of really think about their financial structure as well as their need when they're going through that process. And so I think, Mark, you have an article for us.
Yeah, this one was a very interesting article, but a little bit of a difficult one for me. So this is from Philanthropy Daily, and it is an opinion piece called "Brother, Can You Spare an ROI?" And so, I'll categorize up front by saying this article came across to me as old man yells at cloud kind of a situation. So here we have a gentleman who posits that philanthropy is becoming a business, and that more and more colleges and universities are offering degree programs and courses of study to make nonprofit work more focused on the bottom line and focused on numbers and focused on metrics rather than focused on charity. So on the surface, that seems reasonable, but yet this author seems to want to continually hearken back to the good old days, if you will, of when this wasn't the case and we were focused on the charity. But at the same time, nonprofit grant funding, nonprofit accounting in general in the world, and finance in general has gotten more complicated, and there are more streams of revenues that nonprofits can go for. And I think dismissing people out of hand because they choose to professionally go for something, that is the equivalent of an MBA for a nonprofit world, I think maybe it's a little bit reductionist. I understand the drive to want to get in there and focus on the charity, but a lot of the positing of this article is, I think he sums it up in one sentence. You don't need experience. You don't need judgment. It's just a matter of technique. So in other words, there's no judgment required on anybody's part who has taken these courses, or because nonprofit work is no longer a passion about the mission. Nonprofit work just becomes a matter of crunching numbers. And, if I can make my return on my investment and my, services that I'm providing meet this number, then I am a successful fundraiser, or I am a successful whatever. But I think this takes out some of the passion and some of the inherent intent behind what nonprofits actually do. It was a tricky article. I think he made some good solid points, but ultimately I don't land where he does. And I'm curious what my fellow accountants think. And, if we should go back to the good old days of nonprofits just being just charity work and, the numbers be damned.
Well, I think this guy's looking back with rose-colored glasses, because if we want to harken back to the quote-unquote good old days, we can go back to the 70s and 80s. If we're talking about the good old days, I think I would hearken to say that I think that nonprofits now and especially the agility that is available to nonprofits, and how you can be a small nonprofit and operate in a space and be able to receive donations and such micro donations, through Stripe or very small individual donations, and through a website or through social media, you're able to spread your message and be able to get out there and working, is far better than, the behemoths of United Way or Easter Seals or any of those fundraising organizations that exist that were really big, like in the 80s, because they were necessary. And if you tell me those weren't operated like corporations with large overhead and very little, and maybe 50 cents or on the dollar spent towards the programs, I would tell you you're crazy, because that is exactly what happened, and it's what they got in trouble for in the 80s. So I would say that I think nowadays you're talking about a very agile space, and through the advent of technology, if you're savvy about it, I think you're able to really focus on the mission. And I think the public's awareness of how much is spent on a program or on a mission versus how much is spent to cover that mission is much, it's much more out in the open, I guess, through disclosure and such. And I think with the respects to it turning into a business and having MBA programs around it, I think that's a direct, like, it's the market at work. You have the need for individuals to have this kind of education, and there is degree programs that propped up around that. If we were back in the old days and you're looking just to be a great grant writer, well, that means you needed to spend 30 years or 20 years being a grant writer. There was no playbook, or maybe there was, but you had to go to the library and thumb through the Dewey Decimal System to find it or whatever. But, like there was books on it, I guess. But now you have, full, donor or fundraising, like conferences and programs set up around being a fundraiser, a social worker, or an MBA and like nonprofit, finance or fundraising or grant writing, and all these things that prop up around this are only here to better the ability of nonprofits to be able to generate funds. And so for it, I just see it as like an extension of the profession. I don't see it as like, I guess, like Mark said, and it is like an old man shaking his fist at the cloud, and looking back through rose-colored glasses. Yes, we may talk about return on investment, and we may talk about donor advised funds and all these fancy new things. But at the end of the day, if you're working at a nonprofit and you're not any kind of motion, of mission or vision or focused of what you're doing, then you're not going to be very happy, because nonprofit work probably pays less, and you're probably working long hours, understaffed. If you don't have a passion for what you're doing, you're not going to make it very long in this business, or in this sector, because you could take those skills and translate them over to a for-profit business and probably get paid a lot more. And so it's, I think you're correct. I think, his attitude about these advanced degrees, it's just the market reaction to a need. So, but I don't know, maybe Tammy has different thoughts on it.
No, my thoughts are in line with yours. I mean, I think that, and I was thinking through this, I don't really like the absolutes, like it's all or nothing. So it's like either you're thinking about it as a business or you're only thinking about it as a charity, good cause. So that one I had a little bit of a struggle, because to me, it's a combination of both. I think that what has happened is, one, there's a lot of different types of revenue sources now for nonprofits that make it a little bit more complex and confusing. So there's some need to support and understand that. I also think that there's a lot more of the organizations that people are giving money to, and donors are being a little bit more kind of, they want to learn a little bit more and be a little bit more choosy on where they put their money in. And in order to do that, sometimes it's the numbers that help them to understand that, along with the cause and the mission of the organization. So it really is a combination of both. So the all or nothing type of view was a little bit of a challenge to me. And I also think that what this article does kind of miss the point on is that there's also, unfortunately, a lot of fraud or things that have happened that causes the number crunching and review and accountability of the ROIs, or all those things that come out of it, that make it important for people to have. If people are donating more and giving more, and if there's more organizations available around that are also looking for funds and revenue resources, and there's different types of funding that are now being added, the complexity overall has increased. And therefore, you have to find a mechanism, and a lot of times it is numbers, to really show how an organization stands apart from another and how they're held accountable. So I don't know. I mean, I do, agree that not focusing on a mission or a cause is not great. It's not good. It's not the purpose of an organization, but there has to be some type of way to do both.
Yeah. And I really like what you just said there about the kind of the both and, right? You can focus on the numbers and you can focus on the charity, because I think one of the things, as I was reading this article, I'm like, you can be a professional. You can go and work in an organization, even if you're not fully invested in the mission. That doesn't mean that everybody who's working there or all the volunteers don't buy into that mission, right? And you could potentially have people who are in the upper echelons of management at this organization who don't disagree with the mission, but are there because they have professional skills to do so. But then you have an army of volunteers that do believe in the mission. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Like if you're not coming in as a volunteer to run the finance department and, do all this, then there's no point in you being there. So I really like, I like the direction the nonprofit sphere is going, and I think it's going to continue to grow, and we're going to continue to evolve. And I think, we have some discussions coming up on donor advised funds and lots of different interesting ways that the nonprofit industry is morphing. And I think just staying stuck with the past and thinking it should be one way forever doesn't really work anymore. But AJ, I think you've got another article for us.
Yeah, speaking of fundraising and donations, this article is from Philanthropy Today, and it's called "What's the Value of Macro Trend Research for Fundraisers?" So the article is based around what the author calls the holy grail of fundraising, which is the Giving USA report. And what this is essentially it's an in-depth breakdown of how and researching of where philanthropic dollars are going, and so but what the author is proposing is that fundraisers need to take this with a grain of salt. And often they look into it and they think that this is somehow going to fundamentally change what they do. And so one of the things that he mentions is that breathless analysis of the new data and a growing cottage industry of complementary resources, not complementary like the free penny at 7-Eleven if you need one, take one, but complementary like as they are supportive of that, and they probably cost quite a bit of money if we're talking about fundraising here. So essentially what he's saying that a lot of fundraisers, especially in smaller organizations, is that if you took the time to really deep dive into this report, your time would be better spent speaking to donors. But he lays out kind of what you can use this report for, and I'll kind of go through it, and I'd like to get the panel's take on it. So step one, it can help you know and cultivate your donors better, meaning you can see where philanthropic dollars are coming from. If there's like a large push to say grants, then maybe you focus your organization on writing grants. If it's coming from the private sector more, or it's coming from private foundations or something, you can kind of adjust your strategy in your thing. So it can kind of provide you with an overall 30,000 foot view of where dollars are coming from. Two, it can help you anticipate future opportunities and challenges. So it's talking about we're talking in our next podcast actually about donor advised funds. I know that was kind of like the sexy new thing, 5-6 years ago, because it came into vogue because of tax law changes. So I think, looking at a report like this and understanding and having a runway on something that's new and different, which I don't think a lot of people had a lot of experience in, is valuable. Three, it can inform your long-term programmatic and financial planning. So, I guess if you see grant funds dropping off, you can plan for this. So, and then the last thing he says is extreme caution, stick to fundamentals. And I think this is the driving kind of underlying tone of the article is this donor report or anything that you find like as a tool to use in your financial planning and donation strategy and I guess revenue stream planning is to don't stray away from the fundamentals. Don't go away from what got you there. And if you have strong and it goes without saying, if you have strong donor commitments and conversations and a good relationship with your donors and grantors, that's going to serve you far better than some pie in the sky new scheme to bring in money. So, but I don't know, maybe he's missed something here, but I'd kind of like to get Tammy and Mark's perspective on this one.
So yeah, I think this is similar in the last article in that there's room for both, right? It's a both and proposition here, because if you've got an accountant, they're not only going to be looking at the macro aspect of this, they're going to be getting deep into the financials. I think this is probably speaking to the non-accountants at an organization, and anyone who's worked at a nonprofit has probably come across the people in management who always come across with the new idea or the new latest trend, and how can we take advantage of this? And they're staying so focused on what the research and the articles say about the direction we're going, that they're not seeing the trees through the forest. So I think it's a little bit of both, right? You need to focus in on what your mission is, what you can actually get accomplished, but you should also see, which direction the Titanic is headed, so that you don't hit that iceberg, of funding wall where all of a sudden donations aren't coming in because you're trying to do something that is out of date. So I guess my take on it is, both and.
I would agree. And kind of sticking to that Titanic story that you have going on there, or example, I think that one thing I would say is that you have to be able to be quick on how you pivot, because unlike the Titanic, it takes a long time. If you see that iceberg and things are changing, it takes a long time to kind of move over to a new course. But some of these things, in terms of understanding what got you there, to what AJ said, and understanding kind of what are available in terms of funding and those things, is that you kind of have to be able to analyze and go quickly and diversify. So it's one of those interesting kind of things where it's like, it's not, you have to look at all of it, because, times are changing. And so the ways and methods can also change, or the way that, that you need to be able to, I guess, kind of seek those out and still kind of go back to, to try to maintain what you have. So it's an interesting article. It's definitely meaty, and there's a lot of things to take away from it. But I do think that you always have to look at where you've been, where you're going, and all those little steps in between.
And I think for me, what it really brought out, and something that I hadn't thought about, was, like understanding better where your funding resources are coming from. Often we think, as accountants, we think after the fact of how we're going to record something, but we don't often think of how it got there. And then, having a good development department, or if you don't have a development department, understanding from the people that are bringing in donations, grants, and contracts, understanding where those funding sources are coming from, and understanding how that might change year to year, I think is more valuable than maybe identifying the new hot thing in the market, So I think for me, it was like kind of eye-opening and made me think about that a little bit more, as opposed to just, the new hot trend or anything. So, Mark, we're going to do a fun do and don't topic today, and I think it's your turn to introduce it this time.
Yeah, so we're continuing our journey into the do's and don'ts of the nonprofit accounting sphere. And we're talking more general topic this week, the nonprofit finance department do's and don'ts. So some of these will apply to finance departments in general, but some are a little more specific. So if you're just starting up a finance department, some of these things to set up might be helpful to keep in mind. But if you're a longstanding accounting department that has an annual audit, it's still important sometimes to get back to fundamentals. So that's kind of what I wanted to present today, and have us kind of comment on. My first do, which maybe is a little bit of a backlash from the article I just did, is do hire professionals that understand nonprofit accounting. So obviously, if you're getting to a size where complexity is starting to enter into the picture, and you need to kind of get a grasp on what is going on in your finances, a finance department with people who are experienced in nonprofit financing will certainly help. Tammy, I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah. So another one would be, establish and adhere to a set of internal controls. And I think that this is something to always kind of review and look at, especially if you're just starting out, or you're kind of already established, or as you're growing, things may shift. So you might have to be creative in how do you develop those internal controls. But those are kind of needed, especially if you have grants or donor kind of set policies or restrictions, or any of those types of things, to really understand the internal controls and to have them developed. So to kind of look at that. As far as don't, I think don't necessarily neglect the compliance piece. So we talked about this in previous podcasts, but there are different requirements for state filings, federal filings, there's insurance requirements, there's licenses that may be in play. So don't, ignore those, and don't understand that there's some compliance requirements associated with those. How about you, AJ?
Yeah. So my do is, I think, it's kind of a dope too, but don't be afraid to document. I even find with like small, there's even small nonprofits kind of tend to go down the path of we're just doing. But even large nonprofits, even if they have a fiscal policy in place, and that's my due, is make sure that you have a fiscal policy. But even like larger nonprofits, if they have a fiscal policy in place, make sure you're updating it and reviewing it on a regular basis. Nothing's more egg on your face than presenting, like a new grantor or your audit firm, your fiscal policy manual. It has old names in there, or like a position that no longer exists, and they ask, well, when they go through it, you pray nobody sees it. But, I think at least yearly, if not every other year, you need to look at those policies and procedures and make sure they're there. And if you haven't done so, just Google like template for fiscal policy manual and for nonprofits, and you'll find a gazillion things out there, and so I think making sure that you have one, and that really, then we talked earlier about having a professional and talking about like the having an internal set of controls. When you're writing those down, you can point to the fact like you have controls over there and understand what you need controls around and how they work. And those can be then like, I guess the playbook is the fiscal policy manual. What it also does is when you're making that fiscal policy, it can alert you to blind spots that you maybe didn't think about. Because I think when we found this in our own kind of experience. I think anybody that's worked in a financial department, you're kind of siloed doing your part of the finance recording or analysis or wherever you're at, but you're kind of in there and you're trusting that everybody upstream and downstream is doing what they need to. And I think coming together for a fiscal policy can really open up the discussion if there's blind spots or one-offs or something that you haven't thought about yet in the full flow of money in, money out that hasn't been addressed, and I think it's a worthwhile exercise. It's not the end all be all of a finance department, but I think it's really important to have that as a basis. So what's our next one, Mark?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a do and a don't. And I think I want to encourage everybody to ask a lot of questions, right? So do ask questions. And that could be to your board members, that could be to fellow accountants in your accounting department, that could be to anybody who's working on a program or who's involved, a stakeholder, could even be of donors or of people who are getting benefit from one of your programs. I think asking questions, remaining open, not shutting yourself off. AJ mentioned the word silo. I think it's so important that you don't just think you are the tower on the hill, that you are the accounting department. People should come to you and, kiss the ring, if you will. I think you really just need to be open and be asking the questions. And I think one of the important aspects of that, which also AJ just alluded to, is asking the board, right? Because the finance committee is often helping set the overall policy for what the organization's finances should be. So are you carrying out your procedures in accordance with the board's wishes and in accordance with the larger mission? If you're not asking questions and you just think you're doing everything right, you're going to have a rude awakening at some point.
Yeah. And to add to that too, I think that, really doing reporting out functions and make sure those timely, whether that be your monthly financial reports, whether that be budget to actuals, which then of course do budget. That's always kind of my first plea of everything. But when you're doing those reporting processes and procedures, that you're sharing that with the end users or people within the organization, that you're walking them through the financials. I think we've talked about this, many podcasts ago, but sometimes financial statements can be a little bit overwhelming and people won't ask questions because they think that they're supposed to know what that means or it's a common type of thing. So they don't ask questions. So if you are responsible, for the financial records, take the time to really walk members through that so that they can understand it and encourage them to ask questions, because the only way for them to learn about it or to get those questions resolved would be for them to ask it. And I always say, in other discussions I have with folks, is that usually if you have a question and you're bold enough to ask, there's probably about 500 people who had that same question that will not ask. So don't assume that people know. They may not understand a complex accounting revenue stream source. They may not understand a simple one that you think that they should understand. It's just better to go ahead and walk them through the financials, say, here's what happened, here's what it means, and here's what we can look at towards the future. So that's my massive do. Sending it back to you, Mark or AJ.
I'll take it. One of the things, like following up on that, the platform to be able to ask questions. So one of the do's is you should have some kind of regular meeting. The time, like how often that is really depends on the organization. I mean, if you have a lot of moving parts, it could be weekly, like a weekly check-in of the finance department to make sure, are you on track? Are you on track? What do we need? Do you need help? Like that kind of thing. But then it's also like making sure that you have like monthly or every other month meetings with program managers and making sure they're on budget, and then, being able to present that information to them and have them ask questions about what they can spend their money on, what they should slow down paying money on or buying. So it's really important that and then we can't forget board reports. I mean, the board is the one that needs to see the financial reports at a very high level. And I think, the other don't is, the other side of that is don't have these reports be so complicated that the people you're presenting them to won't understand it. If you're presenting to the rest of the finance department or the accounting department, don't make it so that, you can be super detailed. We can go through every balance sheet item, piece by piece, and make sure there's support and, schedules and reconciliations for every balance sheet account, and, question the revenue amounts and the allocations and all that kind of stuff. But if you're presenting to a program manager, they don't need to see the whole organization's finance report. They just need to see their budget, and they just need to see their budget to actual to know where they sit. So I think we've said this ad nauseum, but know your audience that you're presenting this to, but make sure that you present it, because often people don't, and it, can sit and linger. And like Tammy said, the board will have questions. Why haven't we seen financials? Are we sinking? Are we doing great? We don't know. We haven't seen it. So I think reporting on that, I mean, and heck, you're going to have to report to grantors and donors that ask for it. So making sure that your finance department is set up to be able to do that. The don't would be, don't report, but I think, or don't share, and I think that's really, when you're working at a nonprofit above and beyond like a for-profit, you need to be as transparent as possible. Don't be too transparent, with donors and such, but you need to be able to provide the information that's requested, in a timely manner. So be prepared to be asked all kinds of questions and have the reports available to be able to answer those questions, hopefully within a timely manner. So Mark, you're up next. Oh, sorry.
Add something real quick to that. Yes, because I think that in terms of providing the specific information to particular departments or people makes sense, but I also do encourage sharing the overall view of an organization, but you could probably do that at a very high level. I think one of the things I've learned with nonprofits as well as with for-profit entities is that sharing that financial view, even at a high level with everyone within the organization, really helps people understand how the organization is doing and that they are not siloed. So I would just add to your comment about, yes, give the information that they need, and then also give the information that could be on a broader view, but make sure that you either simplify, or summarize it or provide it in a way that makes sense and that your audience. So knowing your audience is the key thing that I think I heard you say. So I would stick to that on that. So sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Oh, it's actually it's a great suggestion too, because I have an organization that does like a monthly report to their, to internally and to their board members and anybody interested that reports financial results in a large scale thing. But sorry, that's the second time I cut you off, Mark. Sorry, my bad. Go ahead.
No worries. This is banter time. There is no cutting off. We're going to aim to be like the McLaughlin group. No, you're wrong. Anyway, so I think my final point is and this is where we cue the swelling Ennio Morricone music. Don't forget the mission, right? This is the fundamental reason for the nonprofit's existence. And as an accountant, we mention it frequently, but you are not exempt from that mission. And you need to make sure that everything that you're doing, from your personal conduct, to interactions that you have with vendors on the phone, donors, anyone you touch, your emails, right? You represent the organization. And even if you're not, 100% true believer and you're there for the job, right? Because you were hired as an AP clerk, you're still representative of your organization. So don't forget the organization, don't forget your mission, and make sure you embody that. And if there are things that come across your desk that seem contrary to the mission, bring that up. Again, back to the asking questions, but it's so vital that everybody in a nonprofit organization believe in what's happening. And even if you're not, even if you haven't drunk the Kool-Aid, as it were, you still want to be representative of what that larger mission is.
Great discussion. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for another episode of Profitless on Purpose, the nonprofit focused accounting podcast. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons if you're watching this on YouTube, or rate us on your favorite podcast app. Check us out on Twitter at Profitless Pod. We'd love to hear your feedback and your questions. So please do that. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.